I used to think that numbers never lied. They were constant, clear, incapable of betrayal, unlike people. My name is Adrian Miller, and I have spent most of my 32 years believing that precision could protect me from chaos. But life inside the Miller family taught me otherwise. Our mansion at Hollow Ridge Estate stood like a marble monument to ambition. My father, Richard Miller, built Militech Infrastructure Group from the dust of small-town contracts into a global empire. He ruled boardrooms the way kings rule courts, with charisma sharp enough to cut. My older brother, Ethan, inherited every ounce of his magnetism, the golden heir who could charm investors with a grin. My mother, Clara, drifted between them, graceful and gentle, the only softness in a house made of stone, and then there was me, the quiet one, the numbers man, the adopted son no one mentioned, but everyone remembered. Even in childhood, I felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. At work, I kept my head down as Chief Financial Officer. My job was to keep the money flowing and the spreadsheets clean. But lately, the numbers whispered of danger. Our Harbour Line expansion project, once capped at $40 million, had swollen to twice that size. $5 million had vanished from a partner account in Nashville. When I presented the irregularities at a board meeting, my father brushed me aside with a flick of his wrist. "Not every fluctuation means disaster, Adrian," he said, voice smooth as glass. Ethan laughed, leaning back in his chair. "He's just nervous, Dad. You know how our little accountant gets." The others chuckled. I swallowed my protest and watched the matter dissolve into laughter. That night, I sat alone in my apartment overlooking downtown Atlanta. The glow from my laptop lit the darkness as I traced transaction after transaction. Some led to closed subsidiaries, others to shell accounts with vague names like Kensley Consulting and Harper Logistics. My stomach tightened with every discovery. Something was rotten, and the stench led back to my own family. I confronted Ethan one evening after the office emptied out. The fluorescent lights hummed above us as I held the printouts in my hand. "What is this?" I demanded. He scanned the papers, then smirked. "You really don't get it, do you? The world isn't a ledger you can balance, little brother. Some deals need flexibility." "Flexibility?" I shot back. "You mean fraud?" He laughed softly and clapped my shoulder. "You worry too much. Maybe you're not cut out for this." I left before I said something I'd regret, but inside, fury burned like acid. The next day I went to my father. His office occupied the entire top floor of Militech Tower, a cathedral of glass and steel. He didn't look up when I entered. "Dad," I began carefully, "the Harbour Line expenses are wrong. Someone's moving money off record." His pen paused mid-signature. Then, without meeting my eyes, he said, "Your job is to keep the books in order, not question my decisions." A dismissal. A warning. Both. When I returned home that night, my phone buzzed, a message from my mother. "Dinner tomorrow. Just us. Please come." The following afternoon, sunlight spilled across the marble floors of the Hollow Ridge sitting room. Mother poured tea, her hands trembling slightly. "You and your father have grown so distant," she whispered. "Promise me you'll be careful, Adrian. He's under pressure." "And Ethan?" She trailed off. "I just want the truth," I said. She smiled sadly. "Sometimes the truth breaks more than it mends." Her words stayed with me long after I left. Days later, an invitation arrived. Family dinner to celebrate unity. It sounded rehearsed, too polished. Still, I went. Dusk painted the estate in amber light as I drove up the long, winding road. Laughter drifted from the veranda, the clinking of glasses echoing through open windows. When I stepped out of my car, my phone buzzed again. A new message, no sender listed. "Be careful tonight." They know what you found. My pulse quickened. I scanned the driveway, only servers and chauffeurs. I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced a smile as I entered. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and pretense. Executives mingled with shareholders, their laughter brittle. My father stood at the center, booming and confident. Ethan floated beside him like a shadow of pride. Adrian. Richard exclaimed, arms open. So glad you could make it. Ethan handed me a glass of wine. A toast, he declared, raising his own. To family and forgiveness. I lifted mine mechanically, the taste of bitterness stronger than the Merlot. Moments later, I noticed Ethan slip something into my leather briefcase resting by the buffet. My heart stopped. Pretending not to notice, I excused myself, carrying the case into the hallway. Inside, an envelope lay atop my documents. I tore it open, fake invoices, forged authorizations, and a USB drive labeled offshore transfers. All in my name. They weren't just silencing me, they were framing me. My hands trembled, but my mind sharpened. I tucked the envelope into my jacket, returned to the dining room, and waited for the right moment. When Ethan turned to greet another guest, I quietly slid the envelope into his inner pocket. Minutes later, the double doors burst open. Uniformed officers and a suited investigator from the Georgia Financial Bureau strode in. Gasps rippled through the crowd. We've received credible evidence of embezzlement at Militech, the lead officer announced. Adrian Miller, you're accused of financial misconduct. All eyes turned to me. My father's expression was unreadable. Ethan looked almost triumphant. I stood calmly. You can search me. I have nothing to hide. They searched my briefcase, my jacket, my laptop, nothing. Then, steadying my voice, I said, maybe you should check my brother. Ethan froze. The officer reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. Silence fell like a hammer. Ethan's face drained of color. This isn't mine. Someone planted it. The investigator flipped through the papers. These are the same documents submitted in the anonymous tip. Mr. Miller, you'll need to come with us. The guests murmured, the illusion of perfection shattering in a chorus of whispers. My father's eyes burned into me, fury and disbelief tangled together. When the officers led Ethan away, I exhaled for the first time all night. The mask had cracked. The next morning, the headlines screamed scandal. An emergency board meeting convened in Militech's high-rise conference room. My father, pale and tight-lipped, called it a misunderstanding, but the shareholders weren't fooled. The audit traced multiple irregular transactions to Ethan's credentials. Richard and Ethan were suspended indefinitely. The board appointed me acting director of finance until the investigation concluded. That evening, my father stormed into my office. You think you've won, he hissed. You ungrateful mistake, we took you in, and this is how you repay us. The word mistake hit harder than any blow. Suddenly every cold glance, every half-smile, every unspoken distance made sense. Later that night, unable to rest, I drove back to the mansion. The corridors were dark, the house hollow without its noise. In my father's locked drawer, I found a faded envelope labeled Adoption Records Private. Inside lay my birth certificate. My mother's name read Isabella Hart. No father listed. A handwritten note rested beneath it, adoption completed. Never mention this.
The morning after the storm, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, but my resolve burned brighter than the sun rising over the wreckage. I told myself that if my parents could deny me in my darkest hour, then I would no longer waste a single tear begging for their love. I owed my children more than grief. I owed them a future. With nothing but determination and the help of strangers who showed more kindness than blood ever had, we began the slow, painful climb out of despair. Volunteers handed out blankets and meals, neighbors we barely knew shared words of comfort, and shelters opened their doors without hesitation. Each act of kindness felt like a small light in the endless darkness, and I realized that sometimes family is not born but found. Days turned into weeks as we pieced together fragments of stability. My husband found work in rebuilding efforts, swinging hammers and carrying lumber to earn what little he could. I took on 2 jobs, cleaning in the mornings, serving in a diner at night, my body aching but my spirit unwilling to surrender. My children adjusted, carrying their resilience like a badge of honor. At night, when they slept on thin mattresses in the shelter, I would watch them breathe peacefully and remind myself that every sacrifice was worth it. I was no longer the broken woman abandoned at her parents' doorstep. I was a mother forging strength from ashes. Then came the truth that set my anger ablaze. It arrived quietly, whispered by a neighbor who had spoken with my brother's wife. My parents had not refused me because they lacked space. Their house was large, with rooms standing empty. They had refused me because Jonathan insisted it would be inconvenient to share. He had poisoned their minds, painting me as a burden, warning them that my family would bring nothing but drama. And they had believed him, just as they always had. My blood boiled as the realization struck. They had chosen comfort and favoritism over compassion, lies over loyalty, but instead of crumbling, I let the betrayal fuel me. I refused to waste energy seeking revenge through bitterness. I would strike in silence, with success so undeniable that even whispers would echo louder than shouts. I poured my soul into a small idea that began at the shelter's kitchen table: baking. I had always loved it, and soon, neighbors who tasted my bread and cakes began asking for more. Orders trickled in, then multiplied. With the little savings we scraped together, I rented a modest shop space, painted the walls with my own hands, and opened the doors to what would become my bakery. It wasn't easy. There were nights I slept on flour sacks, mornings I rose before dawn, and days when exhaustion nearly broke me. But people came, not just for the food, but for the story of resilience behind it. They admired the woman who had been cast aside yet still found a way to rise. Word spread, and with it, my business grew. Soon, my bakery became a gathering place, filled with laughter, warmth, and the smell of fresh bread. Every loaf, every cake, every smile from a satisfied customer was a silent victory. Meanwhile, Jonathan's empire, built on arrogance and my parents' support, began to crumble. His business ventures, once praised, collapsed under the weight of his reckless spending and lack of discipline. Debts mounted, partners abandoned him, and the very reputation my parents had guarded so fiercely for him shattered in front of their eyes. I watched from afar, not with glee, but with a quiet sense of balance being restored. Life had a way of humbling those who believed they stood untouchable. Whispers traveled through town like wildfire. People spoke of me with admiration, of how I had endured betrayal yet built something strong. They questioned my parents' cruelty, asking why they had abandoned their daughter when she needed them most. Every compliment I received, every customer who praised my strength, was another thorn pressing into their conscience. They could no longer hide from the truth. Their shame grew heavy, and eventually, it drove them to my door. I will never forget the day my parents appeared at my bakery. Their faces carried the weight of defeat, their eyes searching for forgiveness. They had come, not as the strong figures I remembered from childhood, but as people broken by regret and desperate for help. My children stared at them with confusion, my husband with restrained anger. And I felt nothing but calm. They spoke of mistakes, of needing me, of hoping for another chance. For a moment, the old part of me, the daughter who had once longed for their approval, stirred. But she was gone, replaced by the woman who had built her strength from rejection. I looked at them, and in a voice steady and unwavering, I told them I would not become like them. I would not shut my door in their faces. I gave them food, a place at a table, because compassion was something they had never taught me but I had learned on my own. Yet I made it clear, they could eat, but they could not reclaim the space in my heart they had abandoned. In that moment, victory was mine. Not because I had outshone Jonathan, not because my bakery thrived, but because I had refused to let their betrayal turn me cruel. My children watched me, and I knew the lesson was etched in their hearts: strength is not found in vengeance alone, but in rising above without losing your humanity. As they left, I felt no triumph, only peace. I had closed the chapter of seeking love where there was none. I had found family in kindness, community in strangers, and purpose in my own hands. The whispers of vengeance that once burned inside me had transformed into whispers of resilience, of dignity, of victory without hate. When I tucked my children in that night, I told them softly that family is not defined by walls or names, but by love and loyalty. I told them that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, it means refusing to carry bitterness like chains. And I told them that the greatest revenge is not destruction, but showing the world that no betrayal can break you. I kissed their foreheads, turned off the light, and smiled into the darkness. The storm had taken my home, my parents had taken my trust, but neither could take my strength. I had built a new life from the ruins, and in that life I was free.